Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Welcome to the panel, Non-Binary Navigation in Theater Production. We're so glad that you are here with us to hear from our amazing panelists. So we'll hear introductions from them first, and then we'll get started into some questions. So my name is Bryn. I'm the moderator, and I use she, her pronouns. And right now I'm the assistant production manager at Actors Theater. And then I will pass it over to Sloane.
My name is Sloane. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the production administrator at the Shakespeare Theater. And I guess I get Seth.
Hi, I'm Seth Torres. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them, and I am a Chicago-based lighting designer. Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie, pronouns they, them. I currently live in Brooklyn, New York as a freelance performer and production worker. I'm also the Associate Artistic Director of Agile Rascal Theater and a member of the Syndicate. Oh, sorry, Snem.
Hi, I'm Snem. I use they, them pronouns. I am a freelance designer, deviser, stage manager, etc. Based out of Minneapolis. I'm also currently an artistic and administrative apprentice with the Playwright Center. Gylanni.
Hi, I'm Gylanni. I use they, she, them. I'm really happy to be a theatrical designer in New York. I've done costumes, set, lights. Haven't done sound, but if the future of theater is over Zoom, then I guess I'll get into it. Usually doing new work, but have also worked with really great theaters like Torn Out and the New York Deaf Theater.
That's awesome. Welcome to our panelists. So our first question is, I feel like it's a good question to start things off. How can theaters be more inclusive to trans and non-binary people in production specifically? Anyone feel free to jump in.
I feel like baseline, oh, sorry, Gylanni.
No, go ahead.
Just baseline, let's gender neutralize those bathrooms, y'all. Shouldn't be a conversation anymore. It happens to still exist. Putting that out there. Gylanni?
Yeah, I think a really easy thing to do for a lot of theaters when they're sending out like W-4s, I think if they just sent out like a sheet that was like, hey, what is the name that I need to put on your checks, but also what is the name you would like to be referred to as? What are your pronouns? And just in general, sparking that conversation. I think a lot of people have started with, at table reads, asking everyone to go ahead and just share their pronouns. But I think that's a good start, but we can do better.
I also think to jump off of that, if at your theater, the way that you distribute checks is by putting them in a mailbox or putting them on a bulletin board, it would be really great if there was a sticky note over my old name, or if you put the check in backwards and just wrote my name on the envelope, so that not everyone has to see my old name and be like, is that your check on the bulletin board? Because that's awkward.
I think whenever you're in doubt on anything, this is an anecdote from not a theater company per se, but a rope access company that I work for, where we're often being housed in hotel rooms. And so they were doing this weird gender segregation thing in terms of who bunks with who. And they really were rattling their brain over it. And I was like, you could just ask everyone their preference. So sometimes it's a really simple solution, and that you don't have to figure out all on your own, but you can actually just kind of ask.
Yeah, I think asking is the go-to.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think most problems can be solved with just asking.
I think there's two different ways to handle things. There's trying to handle something where you don't know everyone in the cast and you think that some people may or may not be TGNC, trans or gender non-conforming, and you want to be inclusive. And there's also sometimes someone is already who is in the cast or in the production team, and you can just talk to them. You can just ask them how they would like to go about handling things with this production.
Yeah, I feel like also there's something in that of asking for the things that you need to know, versus like the random stray actor being like, so how did you pick that name? Like, what is that to you? And like, yes, thinking about like this thing that we've talked about like when you're there to do your job versus there to educate folks about transness or non-binariness. And so I think also like production teams and folks looking to put work on and host and hire people to like be a little fluent in the conversation on what trans voices are already saying right now. Also thinking about like pronoun use, like the just having pronouns for the non-binary folks versus like everybody offering pronouns, like everybody being part of the conversation. So.
Definitely. I think that's a good segue into another one of our questions, which is, do you often find that your identity affects the kind of work you're asked to do, whether that's related to your job description or maybe not?
Yes. I find that I am often sort of asked by other non-binary people if I will help them come out or advocate for themselves or things like that. And I'm lucky enough to be in the perfect position career-wise to do that. But it is work on top of your regular job. And while it's work I enjoy, I kind of wish that the theater was set up so that the theater world was set up so that we had more resources just built in.
I think it's also, it can be hard depending on what necessarily your job is. As a costume designer, I often am dealing with people and their bodies. And so sometimes, and because I'm also a TGNC person, like things naturally gravitate towards me, and having to present those issues to whoever I need to fix it, whether it's stage management or the director or someone from, you know, a production team. But sometimes things don't necessarily fall under your job description, but will gravitate towards you anyway. And you just sort of have to handle it in a way that is helpful for you and the other person, because you don't necessarily want to become the person that this has to go through every time, especially because then the other people on your team aren't learning how to deal with it properly, which is not fair to them either, because they're going to go off into the world not educated on what they need to be doing.
I'm glad you brought up costuming, because we got a question from someone watching about costuming specifically for non-binary cast members. Like, what are maybe some problems or conflict that might come up when costuming non-binary cast members?
I don't think there are, I think problems is the wrong word. I think that there are different ways that you have to go about things. I've worked on shows where the cast themselves decided, hey, this is how we would like to be paired up in the dressing rooms, and this is how we would like to be like sort of zoned off. And I've worked in shows where it was my job to figure out how the dressing rooms are going to go. And in those instances, again, it's better to ask and talk to people, because and working in New York, sometimes space is limited and sometimes there's only one dressing room. And that is still a space where you need to be talking to people and asking, because sometimes people would prefer if there were a curtain somewhere set up, or if it were talked about that they could change somewhere else. Like, just asking what people need, again, is like top tier. There's also sometimes you need to provide different sorts of clothing for people in order for them to do their job safely, or in order for them to feel safe while doing their job, especially actors. And so, again, communication, talking to people, figuring out what they need and what they have access to and what they don't.
Yeah, just to jump off of that, and this is actually from more of my own performance experience background. I think it would be awesome if costumers, especially if they're the majority of the job is shopping, as opposed to building, if they had a good idea of the different sizes and different kind of clothing gender options, you know, because I've had to freely, you know, make myself heard in terms of like, I wear a lot of young boys branded clothing. This is my size in that area. These things fit me the best. And you may, you know, depending on the actor's preference of what they usually wear and what sizes they're usually dealing with. So just like a more broad range of sizing options.
Okay, another question that we got, very topical. This person would love to hear about your experiences as younger theater makers during COVID and any uncertainty you feel about your role in the evolving artistic landscape moving forward. Big question.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, at least for myself, I feel kind of in the space between deeply uncertain and somewhat deeply sure. Yeah, which I think that there's, yes, I don't know. I feel like this has reaffirmed a commitment to working in exclusively queer spaces and like trans-led spaces. And also, I feel a little wiggly on how money works, and how resource allocation and what happens if the like theater houses, the like smaller theater houses, at least in Minneapolis, that house that work, if those start to disappear because they can't make their rents. It's like, I feel like all of the possibilities are opening and also shifting.
Yeah, I think for me, like, I only do lighting and lighting design. And so that's very challenging given that right now we're doing a lot of things online and there hasn't really been a call yet for people to be doing space designs of people's homes, which I think there definitely is room for. There just hasn't been a call for it yet. So I'm very uncertain in what my role looks like in the theater moving forward, because I don't know what lighting design looks like moving forward and how my skills in that are gonna be helpful.
Yeah, I think I sort of made a joke of it at the beginning with the whole like, oh, I'll get into sound design if theater's over Zoom now. But I think for many designers, I mean, it's great to see that people are so committed to theater and that actors and directors are finding time and ways to meet and, you know, produce work. But for those of us who are, you know, working on the visual arts, who need to be like in the room with you to be doing our job, it becomes a lot harder and a lot more uncertain about what our roles are in the future. I think as a costume designer, there's like some space because I can definitely like at least curate what you're gonna wear while you're on this Zoom call from top up. But you know, it's definitely a little rattling.
Well, I think there's, thank you, Gylanni. I think there is an element of uncertainty just working in theater as it was that we're all pretty familiar with. So, and, you know, the level of uncertainty amongst the gender conversation as well. So we're kind of poised here in a good place for myself to deal with those uncertainties. Fortunately, I'm actually in grad school right now, so I have the framework and structure of a personal investigation into performance theory and what performance is. So I feel pretty hopeful. I'm just kind of like leaning hard into personal practice and maybe trying on some skills and things that I didn't necessarily lean into before or was able to be hired for before, but now like with a lot of this time, you know, making little models and, you know, kind of following my interests and having the freedom to do that and kind of open up a little more of the artistic scope from when we emerged.
So before I became an admin, I had a really broad education in theater, we'll say. Which is a really polite way of saying I have a general BA in theater. So they taught me a lot of things. And when I started out as a stage manager, and when I was stage managing between gigs, I would hang lights, where I would paint flats, or I would do something like that. And I know that as long as there are small theaters and even large theaters, I can make some money. So like if, knock wood, things go absolutely pear-shaped, then I can still stay in this industry that means so much to me and kind of try to get back to where I am now.
Okay, we've got one more question about costumes. And if you need me to repeat this, just let me know. It's a little bit long, and I think it's a really good question. How do you find the balance in your work between reclaiming elements of physical appearance from binary labels, the strong gendered associations viewers have with clothing, and then also the weighted history of non-binary presentation on stage being presented as a punchline?
Love that question. I think it's also something that I personally have to deal with, not just in work, but also in my daily life. A lot of people who know me as the person who takes 3 hours to get ready, because I find it a bit paralyzing, to be honest, sometimes about what I'm putting on and what that expectation, what expectations come on with what I'm wearing and what that says about me and what people are going to then assume about me. And it's like, very like paralyzing. But I think the best thing to do is to have an open conversation with, again, everything starts with communication. Theater is collaborative. You have to be talking to the people around you. You don't do theater in a void. And so talking to both the actor or actors playing that role and also the director and trying to figure out what is the happy sort of medium of, well, we're doing this character and traditionally this character may look this way or may present this way, but you know, how do we see it? How do we open up this narrative? I've worked several times with directors who are like, okay, this character is male. I have casted this female person in this role. The character is not now female. We are just presenting a woman in a male role. She is an actor. How do we portray her as male in this piece? And then you have conversations about what clothing they're wearing, how they're styling their hair, like all those lovely sorts of things. And it can get, again, overwhelming or paralyzing, but you also, I think, have to reach a point where you say, I am putting this out there with my own thoughts and opinions and am allowing the space for other people to look at it with their own eyes and their own experiences. And if they take it in one way, that is representative of them and not necessarily the work that I am doing, if that makes sense. Because not everyone's going to see something and think that it's a magical genderqueer explosion of, you know, freedom. Some people are going to look at it and just be confused and be like, that was a man, I guess.
I don't want to cut anyone off because there's a little, Zoom lag. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, something that I'm also hearing in that is intention of like, why are we making these choices with this character or with this design, and like, who is it serving and who's in that conversation about it? Yeah, everything that opens up.
Right, because context for any of the costumes should be, grounded in the script or the concept of the show. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, not just with, like it's easy to have the conversation when someone's TGNC or when the character is TGNC, but we should also have those conversations when the characters are like cis or played by cis actors, because like, what are we saying when we present this character with this, you know? I'm trying to think of a well-known play, A Doll's House. A Doll's House where she wears pants and A Doll's House where she wears, you know, a dress, say two different things. And so we need to be intentional.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions rolling in. So working in production, especially stage and production management, we're also often operating in a supporting capacity, helping artists' voices to be realized. How do you navigate that dynamic while also advocating for your own needs?
Yeah.
Go for it, Sloane.
It's interesting because sometimes your needs are something as singular as being called by your pronouns, and sometimes your needs are something like having a bathroom relabeled, or like there are internal things and then there are external things. And so it's occasionally hard for me, like as somebody who is a facilitator by nature and a facilitator by profession, to advocate for self. But I find it easier nowadays in my job because I am what's called the very silly title. I am the parent chicken, like the non-binary mother hen of the trans and gender non-conforming people at my job. And so looking out for them empowers me to look out for myself. So, yeah, I know. I had to take a roundabout way to do it, but that was how it worked out for me. But it's not easy. It's not always easy.
Yeah, currently I work in a lot of new play development, and that has been a really interesting role to navigate as a stage manager, and like fresh plays and folks who are trying to explore new topics. And also, yes, I feel like often on the content thing where like a content thing snags me, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel kind to trans people. Like that feels like it's ignoring that non-binariness exists. Like this feels very cishet. And so like trying to hold my role as like taking dutiful notes and like making sure that the actors are cool and like taking time checks, and also trying to navigate where my space is to have that conversation about this thing that's directly affecting me in the room and will continue to impact people. Like also anytime that I'm stage managing, I'm also reading plays as a designer and as a performer and as a director, like reading through these lenses and knowing that this is a moment of impact. And yeah, it's a really tricky thing to figure out how to invite people into that conversation without also saying this work that's in progress like has to stop, or like you need to scrap this whole scene. And so I think like careful invitation, or like asking again about intention, like, oh, this thing right here, like it's bringing up something for me, and I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what you meant, or like I see that you're trying to play this funny moment off here. Like I think that funny moment comes at some people's expense, and so like here's another way to approach a funny moment that doesn't do that. But like reaching in and also trying to be honest about the very real effect that it is and will be having. Like a wiggly space.
To that point, there was a situation where we had a new play. There was a joke in it that was not, it was harmful to trans and gender non-conforming people. And I sort of took my position as production management and wrote a letter, and the letter sort of worked its way up in the company, and eventually the lines got changed, like after people did some thinking. But it wasn't, granted, the revised lines were incrementally better. But like that moment of like trying to figure out like, this isn't my normal job is here, and then I'm gonna take on this extra moment because while I know nobody else is thinking of it, you're going to have TGNC audience members. Like whether you know it or not, whether you have marketed to them or not, they're going to be there because they are human and they enjoy this experience as much as everybody else. And so looking out for sort of all stages is very tricky, but rewarding.
Yeah, similarly, in a few moments in my career, I've been hired specifically as the production stage manager for not in a tokenizing way in terms of my identity being in the room, but my identity being in the room, my mind being in the room, my creative mind and input being in the room when working on material that requires that voice to be there, you know. And I've really appreciated the kind of due diligence on that hiring process to make sure that I was in the room. And in these moments, I actually didn't even know that was why I was hired. So it felt really great. So kind of doing, you know, making sure the people in the room whose experience you're telling on stage are there. And that can be in the capacity of the production team also. Yeah.
I think that advocating for yourself is a really hard challenge, especially for people in our job capacities who are in that supporting role, because oftentimes you're advocating for other people or you're advocating for something else. And so it becomes really hard to talk about yourself in that space. And I think the best thing that you can do for yourself is to make sure that you have someone also there that can advocate with you, that whether it's the stage manager or another designer or just an actor, anyone in the room who knows you and knows the struggles that you're going through, not necessarily everything, but just understands that like these are your pronouns, or this is what you need, or just little things like that. Someone who can also speak up with you and say like, hey, this needs to be corrected. Because it's easier to do when you feel like you're not standing alone.
Yeah, also as a production stage manager, you kind of have the role of organizing the room and organizing the policy of the room. So if you build that in, you know, into your rehearsal reports and into your all of the organization that goes through the entire production, it'll be there and it won't be a question because you're the one leading that that structure.
I'm glad you brought that up because we've gotten a few questions specifically about how stage managers can support trans and gender non-conforming people in the rehearsal room, which I feel like you've addressed, but does anyone have any other thoughts about that question specifically?
Sorry, no, go ahead. No, I've spoken a lot. Go ahead, Seth.
You know, I think for me, you know, the stage manager, the stage manager is one of the people I talk to the most often. I would say I'm talking to them about is sometimes more than I'm talking to a director during tech. And so I think for me, when a stage manager, you know, I've had a couple stage managers who have asked me what they would like me to do if someone misgenders me or something happens in the room. And I really like when stage managers take that upon themselves because then I don't have to do it. And also they're the ones who should be making announcements to the room anyway, as that's part of their job. So just working that in as part of what they're doing is something that I really appreciate when a stage manager is willing to do that. And also when a stage manager, if someone misgenders me, that the stage manager is willing to handle that they are willing to go to that person, you know, kindly and say, hey, you misgendered Seth, you know, during rehearsal. And so that I don't have to do that every time because that also gets really draining.
Thank you, Seth. I just want to add also that going into a lot of production calls that are just kind of one-off overhire situations, the TDs should also have that kind of overarching structure built in. They can't tell you how many countless times I've shown up, sure, in the middle of the day, what have you. That was my call time. People have been there since 9 a.m. But like, can we just take a moment, introduce everybody in the room when a new person comes in? Because that often gets kind of like scuttled off to the side. It's some kind of like time commitment you don't want to give into because there are, you know, deadlines. But it really not only helps feel like an inclusive environment there and that everybody actually cares who they're working with, but it kind of allows smoothing out those wrinkles that will happen later.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jackie, because I think timing and where people come in during productions is a very different thing, production to production. Sometimes you're working on a show and you come in after the table read and everyone's already introduced themselves and their pronouns. Or sometimes you are working an overhire call and you come in later than everyone else. And as a TD and as a stage manager, your job is safety and your job is protecting everyone in the room. And when you don't make space for people to sort of just announce their presence and say like, hi, this is who I am, this is my name, these are my pronouns, you're not keeping people safe and you're not allowing people to feel comfortable in their work environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think to jump off that too, these overhire days, I do a fair amount of overhire work at large Chicago theaters where I will be on a call with 7 or 8 other people. And I think it's really important at the top of the day to have everyone introduce themselves, especially because I'm really tired of like the assistant master electrician not knowing my name and saying, hey, you. It's like, you know, we could do that at the top of the day and just have everyone say who they are. Really helps with the not saying, hey, you. So I think that's something that not only that would make me feel better as a trans person, but also just like a person working in the theater that if I'm going to know the light supervisor, the assistant master electrician's name, like they need to know mine too.
Okay, do we have any advice for teens in theater who are just starting out and also in the process of figuring out their gender?
On one hand, I started doing theater semi-professionally at 12. On the other hand, I didn't come out till I was like in my mid-30s. So I can't fully say from experience, but I can say youth theater is a pretty welcoming place. Like I had a really positive experience in youth theater. And as always, start slow. Like if you're gonna come out, start with one person, then grow and keep going. That was how I came out. That was what I thought was the best method for me. But yeah, just be yourself 100% and sort of see where it goes. I got nothing.
Thanks, Sloane. Yeah, I've been training in whatever the arts since middle school, like in very specific training programs. Very lucky, and so. But something that helped me, and of course, you know, I came out as queer when I was 17, and it was a very, very welcoming and loving community that I came out into. But I think what helped is, and I'm speaking from a performer point of view, because this is kind of the one way that a lot of youth get introduced to theater is through performance, which is great. But as I guess this is more advice for people creating these experiences, especially now, is to have gender fluidity built into it, because something that really helped me as a young actor was to be able to try on all of these characters and try on their different, you know, relationships to gender. And if you leave that door open very early in terms of like, oh, maybe I'll try on what's usually a male role, or usually, you know, a female role and see how that feels. It's almost like an exercise. It's like a simulation that you get to work through and really figure out what feels right and what doesn't. But to keep that as a norm, and so that that's not, it doesn't become in a conflict within the group or the program that somebody wants to try on a different hat, you know?
Yeah, I would say I have sort of two major pieces of advice. One is for young people getting into theater in general, and that's pay close attention to your peers and keep in contact with them. You are all the future of theater. Like eventually everyone who is in theater will be old and retired, and you will be what's relevant. You will be the ones who are making theater, which is great and amazing. So definitely get to know each other now, work together, build up your careers together. The other piece of advice is to work in as much queer theater as possible, because those are going to be the spaces that give you the most freedom and liberation to not only sort of try on the different roles and experiment and see what that's like, but also to give yourself permission to come to work each day or each week or however often and say, you know what, these are my pronouns now, and this is my name now, or I'm testing this, or hey guys, I would like to try being called this instead today. Those are the spaces that are going to be the most accepting of you and of that process and figuring things out. Not that other spaces won't, but these are going to be people that are just more equipped to deal with it because they've also been through it, and they'll be able to guide you and give like semblances of advice. The TGN experience is not a monolith, as they said on the last one.
And I'm sure Snem might have something to say to this too, is that you might want to look into more like devising and original producing programs. So you're not locked into the history of, you know, those gender binaries that exist in the American theater canon, but you're actually given the opportunities to tell your story, to advocate for your story, and to make sure that your voice is heard amongst the collective, because I think that's the most important thing about why theater is and kind of has been and hasn't a fun place to be and a more blossoming place to be for trans and gender non-conforming people.
Yeah, I think holding all of those things and melding them all together, like find the people who you love and keep loving each other, and also make your stories. And that's like sometimes a lot easier said than done. And so I think that like finding places to partner up with and finding folks who are building that space and who are opening those doors is a really vital thing, and then staying with them. But yeah, there's so much there about like, if you're not finding the stories about you, then you get to make them. And that doesn't have to just be writing. That can also be you and your friends recording your conversation and then acting it out again. Like it can also be you designing a window display, right? Like there's like a million ways that it can be theater, and also that it can be community. I think that that's like a big queer theater feel.
On that note, how does working in explicitly queer or trans spaces differ from working in predominantly cisgender heterosexual spaces?
I feel like I'm allowed to mess up. That's like a huge thing, especially like yes, I like to do lighting design and also computers. I don't always know all of the words for computers, and in a lot of not queer spaces, I feel like I really have to be secretly looking up the rules and like have to keep the things that I don't know yet bottled down or like off to the side. And I feel like in queer spaces, I'm allowed to be in process still. I'm allowed to be figuring things out. I'm allowed to ask questions. I'm allowed to be, yes, I'm allowed to be. It's big.
I think the main difference is I am not representative of the whole, and that is the greatest experience ever. Like, as a person who is fairly anxious always, it can be really hard to be in a space where you are the other, and regardless of what that other is. I've been in spaces where I am the only Black person. I've been in the space where I'm the only person of color or the only TGNC, and I've been in spaces where I'm the only Black TGNC person. And it's can be really hard because even when people are progressive and feel open to other experiences in life and what other people are going through and whatnot, even when people aren't bigots is basically the concept. It can be hard because you're like, anything I do might transfer over to another person that they meet that is similar to me. It might make them think that this is how we experience the world and how we live our lives. And that is frightening because you don't want to be that person. No one wants to be that person because no one is right. There's no one right way to do this. And so when you're in a queer space and everyone's queer and everyone's TGNC and you get to see people that are using these are pronouns and you get to see people that are just using he, him, and you get to just see everyone and a full spectrum of queerness, it can be really calming because you're like, oh great, I am in no way, shape, or form being looked at to represent everyone.
Yeah, and it's a brave space too. You feel like you can really honor yourself. I'll just a quick anecdote. The theater company that I work with, the Syndicate, we had one of these amazingly queer predominant reading festivals in Chicago last summer, and I was kind of on the fence. I was kind of like working through some gender issues of my own, and we had the stickers and there were lots of people, and I was putting, you know, she, her on my shirt a lot in this community, and I was like, this doesn't actually feel right. Like this, me in my community, kind of holding on to, you know, the gender I was assigned didn't feel right. And actually it was because of being in that environment that I was able to actually take the steps toward coming out.
Yeah, I think for me, oh, yeah. I think for me, you know, I've actually never worked in an all queer space before. I know, I'm real sad about it, and I really would love to, but I think for me, you know, working in predominantly cis het spaces, especially after I had top surgery at the end of September, you know, I sometimes will talk to people and I just like I won't not say that I'm trans, but I won't say that I'm trans. And I get a lot of, oh, I would never know that you were trans. It's like, this is why I want to work with queer people all the time. Because I don't want to have to like be like, I don't want to be like erased and hidden in a production because nobody thinks that I'm a trans person.
Mm-hmm.
I've also never worked in a predominantly queer space. But A, y'all make it sound amazing. And B, it's, I don't know, I think of it as a privilege at this point. Mm-hmm. Like, to be able to find that space and get into that space. Yeah, that's a theater bucket list for me.
I think it's definitely worth doing and worth being a part of if you can. I'm in New York, so things are obviously a bit more like easier to me. I have a bit more access to queer people, but we have to fly out some queers to you.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping, just kind of circling back to that COVID question, I'm kind of hoping what's to come out of this are kind of grants for smaller queer spaces and theater companies to be able to hire at, you know, pay rate some of the more established queer artists or queer managers or queer stage managers that, like, I know, like with our little fledgling companies, we don't always have the funds to get those people into our rooms, you know? But I'm hoping that there may be some grants available to close that gap a little bit. so that we can all be together.
Okay, next question. A lot of theaters will have like an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee. Do you have thoughts on this trend of these becoming more and more prevalent? In your experience, do you find that they are done well, or if not, what could be improved upon this sort of practice that a lot of theaters have adopted?
So we have one at my company. And they've done some really amazing work, and they've done some harmful work at the same time. In the very beginning, one of the first quote unquote projects that they wanted to do was to get everyone in the company to put their pronouns in their email signature. What they didn't think through, and me and some of the other TG&C people went to them and said, was not everyone's ready to come out or lie. And so that's like you need to tweak because it was supposed to be mandatory. So you need to tweak it so that it's not mandatory. And you're not putting people out there that aren't ready. And they heard us, and after some more back and forth, it became non-mandatory, and a lot of people have them, a lot of people don't. But it was a matter of getting the committee to listen to the people they were trying to serve specifically, which I have found is a slight problem. Like in ours and in other EDIs that I have heard about, is like you'll get people that mean really, really well, but they're not listening to the people that they are trying to serve. And so they go about it and then it's slightly wrong. So yeah.
I saw a tweet the other day that I think I really liked, which what is the like corporate or like business equivalent to thoughts and prayers, and it's ED&I committees. That it's like ED&I committees are not going to fix everything. And I also think, you know, for me on a sort of related point that just because the theater, a theater and a place is doing ED&I work or really committed to this work doesn't mean that the place where you are making the art is ready for that. So yeah, as a personal example, I got an offer to be a lighting supervisor at a summer repertory theater in a very small town in Indiana. And after having conversation with these people who ran the theater, I thought they were lovely and I thought their theater was really great, but I did not feel safe going to this place in Indiana for 8 weeks. And part of what made me not feel safe going there was that, given that my legal name is still my old name, and being a lighting supervisor, you know, you can get hurt. Would I even be treated by a doctor there? Or if something were to happen, like, would I be treated well by the community? And I think if you're going to invite artists to come, especially trans artists and non-binary artists to come, to make sure that your place is ready for that too. And that doesn't mean the whole community has to be fully ready. I mean, there's going to be bigots everywhere, but that means that you have done the work to find a doctor that I can go see, that you have done that work to make me safe in your community. And that's ultimately why I chose to turn down the offer, because while very exciting for me to be a lighting supervisor at this young of an age, I didn't feel like I would be safe in that area. And so I didn't go.
We'll move on to the next question. So earlier we talked about the importance of having someone, maybe like a stage manager, help you advocate for yourself in the room so you know you have an ally. how do you wish these fellow collaborators would advocate for you, or what do you wish they would do, or what do you wish they wouldn't do in those situations?
Listen and have a plan. Like, I had a staff member who was terrified about coming out when she got the job. And so they dead named themselves, was using wrong pronouns, all that jazz. And then I sort of overheard them one day say something about it. And I'm like, hey, we can fix that. Like, you can talk to me. And we started with talking to their boss and rode straight down to getting a new email address. Like, between the two of us, we came up with a list of the things that needed to be changed. I put an order to the list, and then we just worked through the list. But you can't just go like bombing into the production manager's office and saying like, this is an injustice, blah, 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 blah. He's not gonna know what you're talking about. So you gotta, it seems slow, but you gotta do the whole steps. Like, do all of the steps if you're gonna advocate for somebody else.
I think for me, the biggest thing is talking to me again, always, and asking what I would like. As a freelance designer, sometimes you work a show that, you know, is up and down in a month, like it opens and closes in a month, 3 months, you know, and so that means I'm moving from show to show fairly quickly sometimes, and not always do I have the emotional bandwidth or the ability to come out immediately to everyone every single time. It can be hard. It can be exhausting, especially if it's like every couple months. It's ridiculous. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to be out, and that doesn't mean that I don't want to, you know, discuss with the cast and crew about like who I am. And so making space for people to know that, hey, you can do this now here, or we can find another place for you to address it, like however you feel most comfortable. I think also how you go about correcting people that misgender me and that use the wrong pronouns or the wrong name is extremely important, because not everyone handles it the same way. Some people would rather you do it as you're the stage manager. Some people would rather like I personally do it. And so if you're trying to advocate for someone, make sure that you are speaking to them and with them and not for them.
Yeah, also thinking a personal not like is the like group call out, or like getting it wrong and then mid conversation be like, oh wait, Snem, aren't you one of those people who uses different things? Like, did I just use that wrong word? And like, yes, something about the like taking it to a space, or like noting when a thing has happened and being like, oh, there was a shift. Okay, like I'm gonna bring that up later and like have this conversation, instead of the like, it's all on the stage for everything. And yes, the like super catering or the like ignoring. And I think the important thing is like, yes, I'm going back on my own word, because I'm like, I think that there is also worth to the calling it out with a group of people, but that again feels like the thing you were saying, Gylanni, about like, yeah, check in with the person who you're affecting or the person who has been affected, and see how they'd like to move forward.
Yeah, because
Oh, sorry. No, go.
I was just gonna say, sometimes I'm there to do a job, and sometimes I'm like hurt by what's happened, but I'm also focused on my job. And if it's a 12-hour tech day and I need to be sewing or hanging a light or fixing something, like while I'm working is not necessarily the best time to do that, because then it takes time away from me and what I'm doing in order to address a whole sea of issues. You know, a break, or when we're coming back from a break, those are good points. At the end of rehearsal, just as like a general reminder to people, is like good things to do. And again, just like communicating.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to echo Sloane, have a plan. You know, make sure that all of that communication is up front. I know, like, I was an actor recently, being consistently misgendered in a role that was supposed to be non-binary. But I kind of had a system, and I let the director know too, was that like, listen, every 3 times you do it, I'm gonna say something. Just so that it was just happening so much that if I called it out every single time, we just like really wouldn't get through anywhere. So I was just kind of like, listen, here's the deal. Every 3 times I'm gonna say it's been 3. And we're gonna move forward that way. And to know that like, just like implementing a plan doesn't mean it can't change. As we get to know each other through processes and get more intimately connected, and those respect bonds, you know, harden. But yeah, I think communication still is the best way to go. So everyone just doesn't feel like they're being policed, and there's, we all know what's going on. To expect, what to expect.
And have the plan before something happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was reminding me of the whole like how we address actor, like how we pronoun actors in their role or as their character. But just thinking about that as also a stage managerial thing, and like part of the plan, and like having a consistent understanding of like even just clarifying that with the group.
Okay, so even people with good intentions, organizations with good intentions can still perpetuate harm, as we all know. So how do you protect your psyche? Or like, what is like a self-care thing maybe that you like to do?
I think I have 2 things. I am a shopper. I believe in retail therapy. And it's great because sometimes you're not even doing it with your money, you're doing it for the show. And so you're like, oh, this is gonna look great on that character. And then you like feel good, but you haven't spent any of your money, which is the best. So that's a really good way to take care of yourself, is like buying new things. For me is always like restorative, especially like clothing and things that I think are going to reaffirm how I feel within myself. I also think that it is very important for any and every production, for people over the age of 21, that you find people in the production that you like and can at least have a drink with, and that you can go to a bar and like, and if you're sober, that you don't go to a bar, you go to a restaurant, or just someplace after the show or after rehearsal or after tech that you can sit down, like expel all of that negativity, leave it there at the place that is not your home and at the place that is not your work. Because I'm a big believer in energy, and that energy lingers. So like put it out into the world, but someplace that you can walk away from, and with some people that understand.
Yeah, I feel like venting space is like a huge processing thing for me, and like really helps me relieve. And I think it's really important to have people who are part of the show or like close to the show who have some understanding of the culture or the ethos that this work instance is happening, and also having people who are very far away from it so that you can actually unleash all of the things that you've been feeling and that all of those pent up things without all of the complicated, sticky things of still working with folks. Yeah, because sometimes things are really hard, and that also doesn't mean that I don't want to work with those people again. And sometimes things are really hard, and it doesn't mean I don't want to go back tomorrow and do another 6-hour call. And also, I think it's important to be able to recognize that those things are hard and to have people to echo back with, like, yeah, that wasn't fair. They shouldn't have wronged you like that. And how are we going to do tomorrow?
Yeah, I kind of like to find a space in the theater, like figure out like where there's a little cubby hole or somewhere that's where it's quiet, that you can kind of go to retreat in moments of high emotion when you don't want, it to kind of become a thing, but to really be able to have a more of like a meditative experience and be quiet. So like there's a closet somewhere, there's a dressing room that's not being used, or just kind of familiarize yourself with the space itself in the theater so that you have kind of a safe place to go to if you need to be alone.
We've also got a question. This might be a yes or no answer, and that's okay too. Do you think companies should pay people extra if they're having you in the room, say as a production stage manager, and also like a trans dramaturgical consultant? What are your thoughts about compensation for that kind of labor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think paying people is like one of the top like 5 issues in theater, is that people are not always compensated fairly for their work. Especially I think among designers, because being a designer very quickly also becomes being your own technician, very quickly becomes, taking on way too many roles, and you can very quickly become overwhelmed. And if you're not being compensated fairly, it's even worse. I think also being the resident TGNC expert in a space is worthy of its own title in the playbill, and is being the representative of a group of minority is a hard thing to do. Like I said earlier, it's really a really anxious, a really big source of anxiety, especially for me. And I think if you're expecting someone to do labor in any capacity, they need to be compensated, even if you're just throwing them an extra $100. Like, it's something, and it goes a long way.
Yeah, also from a theater's perspective, I think it makes people less resentful to do that, right? Like, I feel like the things that I've heard echoed here is like, yes, we're already taking on those extra dramaturgical roles in the room, and so, but to not be compensated over and over and over and continually expected to do 2 or 3 or 4 jobs makes me not want to do that anymore, or it makes me be like, well, maybe I'm not going to share that resource if you're not actually going to respect the knowledge that's being brought forth. So think about that. Yeah, I feel like if it sounds like 2 jobs, you should at least pay like 1.5, but really you should pay like 2.
Okay, one of our last questions is, I do not know the answer to this. Is there a support group or organization for non-binary theater people that you are aware of?
The Facebook group.
Yeah, there is a Facebook group.
There's a couple Facebook groups. I know USITT runs Queer Nation, but that's not hyper specific, I think. But I have seen a non-binary in theater Facebook group.
I think there are also some location specific too. I help run the Facebook group that's for Chicago.
Sounds like Facebook's where it's at.
I think that's also where like working in queer theater becomes really big, because I think those people also become your support group and your resource. Like I have people that I know that I can text or that I can reach out to and just be like, hey, this thing was really uncomfortable and I've never experienced it before. Have you? How do I go about, correcting this? And I think if you don't have the resources in your production to be able to go to someone and come up with a plan, I think having someone outside of that can help you come up with a plan is really great. And whether that's via Facebook or just texting a friend is, invaluable.
There's also a Ring of Keys. That's kind of like a membership group, like a community of trans and queer theater people across the board, I think from production to performer. And I think their main purpose is kind of like getting people jobs. So promotion, but I'm sure there's a support element to that as well.
There also may be specifically for musical, like I think Wiggly Line's on either side, but like if you're really looking for a music theater hub, I think they're your place.
True.
Okay, so it is past 5. Do y'all have any last thoughts, hurting wisdom or gripes, comments, anything that you want to shout out before the end of this panel?
If you are a theater that is, if you're a theater that's trying to be better towards trans people, you're probably going to mess it up a couple of times, probably more than a couple of times. So just continue to be willing to listen to us and learn. And I can speak for myself in saying that when I see a theater that's trying, I appreciate it. But if that theater isn't willing to listen to make things better than what they've tried, then that's not very helpful to us.
Yeah, just from having done a lot of grunt work in the theater as an assistant in any capacity, just be mindful of the dirty jobs that you're asking people to do. And, kind of try as much as you can to spread that work around. So it doesn't all fall on the shoulders of, the one queer kid who's trying to, work their way up into this community.
I think my best piece of advice is don't hire 1, hire 2, or don't hire 1, hire 40. I don't want to see one TGMC person in your cast or in your production crew, because I know then, I see them immediately and recognize in them that they suffered a little bit, even if it was unwittingly and unknowingly, they went through some things that were probably not great in the production. Because like Seth said, even with the best of intentions and the biggest and best theater companies, you're gonna mess up. So don't hire 1, hire a couple, and then they will, be more likely to correct you or more likely to be able to foster a better environment.
To take off of that, hire not only designers and actors, but production managers and admins and department heads, because the more people you have, the less likely you're going to be messing up. You're going to make it welcoming for people coming in, because there's always somebody around that you can say, hey, because we've all done it. Hey, is this a safe space to work? Is this a healthy environment? And having those people in those positions helps make it a safe and healthy environment. So hire 1, hire 40, but be very specific about where you're putting them.
Yeah, I feel like also boards and artistic producers and artistic directors and managing directors, right? All the way up.
All the way up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to see diversity in who you hire and where you hire them.
Yes.
Any other final thoughts? It's 5:09, so we've gone over. But thank you all so much for joining us, everyone who's watching, and thank you so much to our panelists. So if you learned anything, taken anything away from this panel today, some of our panelists are going to drop their Venmos or maybe an organization they might want to donate to in the comments. So please feel free to hit them up. And again, thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, happy Thursday. Thank you so much to our panelists. Venmos will be commented in just a moment by our other moderator. Thank you all so much.